We all love the NBA draft, and one of my favorite things about it is the history of it. There's so much data, there's so many stats, there's so many players to look back on throughout the history of the league in the NBA draft. And today, I want to go through every single pick in the first round in the history of the league and pick which player was the best to be selected at each position in the first round of the draft. Really quickly though, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, Run Your Pool. Run Your Pool is a fantastic place to compete with your friends and other sports fans with over 50 game types over pretty much every sport you can think. And of course, this time of year, there's no better place than Run Your Pool to run your own bracket challenge as well. So what I've done is I've teamed up with Run Your Pool to create a bracket challenge where you can compete for prizes against me and the rest of the community as well. And the best part about this is it's 100% free. You can compete for cash prizes and it's super simple as well. You go through and you pick every single game of the tournament with your bracket challenge and you get points for every single one that you get correct. And you can see the way the prizes break down here on screen as well. If you're looking for a bracket challenge this year and you want to compete against me as well as the rest of the community, Run Your Pool is the place to be. Like I said, it's 100% free to sign up. You can compete for cash prizes and you can go to runyourpool.com/sporting right now to go ahead and register and get yourself involved in the bracket challenge this year. The brackets are live right now. Again, that is runyourpool.com/sporting. There will be a link down in the description below. Win those cash prizes. It's a 100% free sign up to compete against me as well as the rest of the community. And thank you again to Run Your Pool for sponsoring this video. Let's start with number one. It's not close in my opinion. It's LeBron. You can make the GOAT argument for him if you want to, but when it comes to number one overall picks, LeBron is the best number one overall pick that the league has ever seen. More interestingly is number two overall, because this is kind of like a cursed spot in the draft. And there's a lot of players that we thought were going to be really good that turned out to not be so great. They were picked second overall. I went with Kevin Durant in 2007 as the best second overall pick in league history. And it's actually not that close because there's not that much competition at that pick. Number three overall now, of course, is going to be Michael Jordan in the 1984 draft. That draft in itself is incredible. But when you have who people arguably think is the greatest player of all time, of course, he's going to be the best at his own draft position, and that is third overall. Number four gets really interesting. I went with Chris Paul in the 2005 draft, but you could make an argument if you want to, certainly statistically, for Russell Westbrook, whose career isn't over, or you could maybe make the argument for Chris Bosh because of the championships that he won, but I ultimately went with Chris Paul from the 2005 draft. Next up now, number five. This was a really tough one. There's Charles Barkley, Dwayne Wade, Ray Allen. I ultimately, though, went with Kevin Garnett in the 1995 draft. I really don't think that you can go wrong here with a couple of different picks if you want to make the argument for Wade or Garnett or Barkley. I put Allen there as just kind of like an honorable mention, but this pick, traditionally, historically, is absolutely stacked, but I went with KG as the best fifth overall pick in NBA history. Number six is actually, there's not a lot of competition here, and I went with Damian Lillard in the 2012 draft. There's some other guys you could maybe mention, but in terms of like top tier all NBA caliber players, it kind of had to be Dame here at number six. Number seven, also not close. It's Steph Curry in the 2009 draft. We all know the story of that 2009 draft. Multiple point guards selected immediately before Steph. He ends up going seventh overall and is the best seventh overall pick in the history of the league. Number eight was not a very good pick, and it was really difficult just to pick someone that was worth talking about here. I went with Jamal Crawford, who ironically was in the 2000 NBA draft, a draft that most people think is arguably, one of, if not the worst NBA draft classes of all time. And there's really not a ton of competition here in terms of who was the best eighth overall pick in the history of the league. Number nine, though, is absolutely stacked. Let me read a couple of guys off for you here. Tracy McGrady, Andre Iguodala, Amari Stoudemire, DeMar DeRozan, Gordon Hayward, but I ultimately went with Dirk Nowitzki in the 1998 draft. This draft in itself is a really interesting one and an absolutely loaded one, but when it comes to your standing all time historically, despite some great players that were selected ninth overall here, some of which are still playing, I did end up having to go with Dirk just because of the longevity over guys like Tracy McGrady and Amari Stoudemire, whose peaks were right up there with Dirk's, but didn't have the same kind of longevity. Number 10 now, again, a pretty difficult selection here. I mean, CJ McCollum's pretty good. Brook Lopez is pretty good. Paul George is here, but I ended up going with another player from the 1998 draft, and that is Paul Pierce. Back-to-back selections from the same draft at both 9 as well as 10. Paul Pierce had an incredible career, a long career, and maybe by the time his career is over, Paul George can contend for this, but I went with Paul Pierce as the best 10th overall pick in league history. Number 11, this was difficult because it comes down to either Klay Thompson or Reggie Miller. It's basically the conversation that's had here. And in terms of being incredible shooters, there's a ton of similarities here. And it's like Reggie Miller was the main guy on his team, whereas Clay's always been like a supporting star kind of guy. I did go with Reggie Miller here, but really you could make any argument you wanted to for either one of these guys with the 11th pick. Number 12 now gets really, really weird. Like Steven Adams, Thaddeus Young, like that's the kind of competition we're talking about here. I went with Tyrese Halliburton. He's the most recent player that's been drafted on this list just in the 2020 draft, but that shows you how difficult it is to pick a really good player with the 12th pick in any of these drafts. For whatever reason, there just aren't a ton of good options there. I went with Halliburton. I know he's only a couple years in his career, but I think ultimately in the long run, he's going to be the best 12th overall pick ever, and I picked him over someone like Steven Adams or Thaddeus Young. 13 took no time at all. It's Kobe Bryant in the 1996 draft. Just an incredible player. There really doesn't need to be much said here. It's like the LeBron and the Michael Jordan one. Like there was just never going to be anybody else that was going to be picked here. Number 14 was another easy one. Clyde Drexler in the 1983 draft. Another really, really great draft. And when you compare him to the other 14th overall picks in league history, it's not particularly close. 15, multiple MVP selections and 3 incredible players that have been selected 15th overall. One is Kawhi Leonard. The other is Steve Nash, who of course won multiple MVPs. And then Giannis. And I ended up going with Giannis with the 15th overall pick here in the 2013 draft. It was between him or Kawhi, and you could argue that because of Kawhi's championships that he should have been the selection here, but I just think that Giannis is probably going to, if he continues on this trajectory, is going to go down as a top 10 player of all time, and I don't think that's where Kawhi is going to end up simply because of the durability issues. Him and Giannis have both been at the same level in terms of their absolute peak. Kawhi's been an MVP caliber player despite never winning an MVP, but I went with Giannis with the 15th pick here. 16 came down to either Ron Artest or John Stockton. I went with John Stockton because of the historical significance, of the numbers that he has throughout his career, the all-time leading assist man in the history of the league. But Ron Artest was really good as well. 17, not great options here. Josh Smith, Danny Granger, Jermaine O'Neal, Sean Kemp. I'm going to go with Jrue Holiday, though, in the 2009 draft. Sean Kemp's career was pretty short-lived in terms of its peak, and these other guys are fine, but in terms of being arguably the best perimeter defender in the modern history of the league, I'm going to go with Jrue Holiday with the 17th overall pick here. Number 18, pretty easy, Joe Dumars in the 1985 class. Number 19, it's either Jeff Teague or Tobias Harris. I went with Tobias Harris out of the 2011 class. Again, not a ton of great selections as we're getting later on into the first round, as you would expect, just because there's typically not as many good players left available at this point in these drafts. Number 20 now is Zach Randolph in the 2001 draft. Again, not a lot of competition there. 21 is Rajon Rondo in the 2006 draft. Really, really interesting career. Someone that I've done an entire video on in the past, and maybe his peak was a little bit short-lived, but was really important to those Boston teams, and I went with him with the 21st pick. 22 is either Kenneth Faried, which is who I went with, or Reggie Lewis. It would have easily been Reggie Lewis had he not passed away tragically during his career, but I went with Kenneth Faried from the 2011 draft because there is some more longevity there. If you want to put Reggie Lewis there, that's totally fine. Number 23, Tayshaun Prince in the 2002 draft, one of the better wing defenders of his era, and someone that is an NBA champion and a pretty easy selection here. 24, I went with Kyle Lowry in 2006. There's a couple of other like half decent options here, but I ended up going with Lowry at 24. 25, Nick Batum. Like this is the territory we're now in when it comes to this part of the draft. Nick Batum in the 2008 draft, the best 25th overall pick in league history. 26, Vlade Divac in the 1989 draft. 27, Rudy Gobert in the 2013 draft. One of the better big men defenders that we have now in the modern era of the league. 28, Tony Parker. Again, a really easy one of the 2001 draft. 29, Tony Kukoc, 1993. Not a ton of great players at the 29th pick, but I ended up going with Kukoc. And then number 30 to finish off the video, Jimmy Butler in 2011, the best 30th overall pick in the history of the league. And that one wasn't particularly close either. That 2011 class is really stacked when it comes to the first pick, the 15th pick, the 30th pick, and the 60th pick. Those being Kyrie, Kawhi, Jimmy Butler, and Isaiah Thomas. Those are the entirety of the first round. If you want to see a second round version of this video, I will absolutely do it. I didn't know if there would be interest in that, but it was really cool to go through and evaluate every single player from 1 through 30 in the history of the league. Thank you guys so much for watching the video, and I'll see y'all next time.